Story 1, mine's kind of dumb, but I think it still counts. At work, I'm kind of the Google Sheets expert, and I make lots of tools for different departments to use. Enter new guy who needed to collect, aggregate, and display a bunch of data. My boss was like, send Wish a calendar invite, so you can tell her what you want, and she'll set it up for you. New guy was having none of that and insisted he was going to do it himself. Well, a week later, he finally has this poorly made sheet that doesn't have half the information we need, and we have to have the numbers for the state by tomorrow. So my boss asks me to fix it, and new guy is like, yeah, okay, that's not really possible. This is as good as it's going to get. 2 hours later, I send them both a fully functional and automated sheet that does everything we need, and we'll be able to use it indefinitely, which means next time and every time the state report is due, it will already be done. New guy was like, I would have added that in if I'd had more time. Story 2. I once went to a museum with my sister and her friend, whom I hadn't met before. We got to the Greek art section, and her friend started telling me how she was very interested in Greek mythology. I thought that was cool because I was, unbeknownst to her, doing a master's degree in it at the time and also maintaining a blog of myth retellings, which was quite popular. It was a relief to have something in common with this stranger. She then got oddly haughty and told me she probably knew more myths than I did. So, being polite, I didn't challenge her on it and just asked her to tell me her favorite so that we could have a conversation about it. She proceeded to tell me the myth of Daedalus and the Minotaur. I asked her how she'd heard of that one because it's fairly obscure. She told me she'd read it on a viral blog post on a blog about mythology. It was my blog. Story 3. A friend of mine was at a concert in bad seats and started complaining about it via Twitter. All of a sudden, the band starts reading some tweets and calls my friend up to sit on stage for a couple of songs. They sit him at the piano, and during the next song, they jokingly go, okay, piano solo. The crowd laughs for a second, but then my friend just starts jamming out as he plays piano in his band. Talk about a dream moment getting to play with your favorite band. Story 4. I once challenged a girl who was a friend to foosball, not knowing she grew up with a table in her house and older brothers. I even jokingly put money on the game. Well, I learned a bit about humility that night. The icing on the cake was when she drove me to an automated teller machine to get her the money. Story 5. I'm a very unassuming looking guy. 5'8", 150 pounds, not a tattoo to be found. But back in the day, I was pretty athletic and could hang in games with fringe Division 1 and semi-professional guys. But I can't emphasize how much I didn't look like it at all. Anyway, in college, hanging out in someone's room, it came up that I play a bit, and some dude I didn't know started running his mouth about how he could destroy me. Just wouldn't stop talking. I gave him every out until it basically became personally offensive. Other guys were a bit tired of this jerk hanging around, and they knew I could play, so we all trooped over to the gym late at night in the dead of winter so we could settle things. 11-0 the first game. Not sure if we played after that, but I remember it was 11-0 because I made sure to not let the guy score. And I'm a pretty mellow guy and usually would have laid off and let him score a couple when it was clear that I was better. But this guy was a real jerk, so I just clamped down on him start to finish. I blocked a ton of his shots. He stopped hanging around nearly as much after that, so I was kind of a hero to the rest of the guys. Like St. Patrick. Drove that snake out of our nation. Now that I think of it, being a short, skinny white guy who didn't try to look like I was a player, every time I stepped onto a new court, I had every other person on the floor just automatically dismiss me. You get used to it. Respect, in this case, had to be 100% earned every time. I remember one time, after college, I moved to a new city to start a new job. New coworkers were looking for a fourth guy to fill out their 3-on-3 team. They were not shy in expressing their doubts about me and how well I'd be able to hang with them. By the end of our first practice, they were telling me I should have played at the local Division 1 school. I wasn't that good, but it's the thought that counts. By our first game, they were clearing out when I had the ball. Those days are long gone and I've moved on to other interests, but I'm very thankful that I had those experiences. Story 6. While I would never claim to be an expert, I used to be pretty good at pool. My aunt and uncle had a pool table downstairs, and my parents, for a variety of reasons, would go over regularly and spend all day there. There was nothing else for us, me and my brother, to do, so we just played pool all day for years. Eventually, we got bored and saw that they had a book on trick shots, so we started doing that for fun. We never really mastered them, but they were great for practice in understanding how to get the ball to do what you want. So anyway, for my buddy's 20th birthday, he wanted to go to a pool hall and invited a lot of people. Then he told me it was going to be a tournament, with drinks for individual games, and a 50-50 type of deal for the winner. He gets half regardless because it was his birthday. He insisted I come, and I eventually agreed. We got there, and in the first game they broke, and that was the only shot they got. The rest of mine were pretty similar. At the end, I just looked at him and said, "Told you not to invite me." I found out afterward that a bunch of them had never even played pool before. I felt pretty bad, so I took the money and bought everyone drinks with it. Story 7. I would never go as far as to say that I'm a fencing expert, but I have been fencing casually for about 5 years total, and consider myself pretty good for someone who's casual. A new person came to our fencing practice and demanded of a few men that we do a King of the Hill style matchup. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but I could sense the toxic behavior rolling off of him when everyone declined, yet he continued to insist we do it. He somehow fixated on me, and I decided I'd give it a go in a normal 15-point bout. Initially, I always fence in one style, in order to test out my opponent before switching to a style to trump theirs. During the first few points, I saw him cheering himself on as he established a 1 to 2 point lead. By 4 to 2 in his favor, I had already figured out all the flaws in his fencing style and proceeded to get the next 10 points without losing one round. I could see the guy fuming at the end when I beat him 15 to 5. It was a good feeling. Story 8. A guy I went on a date with tried to serenade me with his okay piano skills. He was incredibly patronizing to me and tried to explain to me what the notes were even when I told him I'm also a pianist. So after his endless explanations, I asked him to move over on the bench so I can try to play. I'm a 2-time Carnegie Hall pianist. He never called me back afterwards. Worth it. Story 9. I asked an 11-year-old if he wanted to play pool with me at a small recreation room at a place I was staying at in Alaska. It turns out he competed nationally. I won the first game because he scratched on the 8-ball, even though I had only pocketed 2. Then he cleaned up the next 2 games without giving me a chance to get more than 1 in. I was maybe 19 then. Story 10. A neighbor on my block in Brooklyn challenged me to a pizza bake-off. I recently catered pizza for my daughter's school, and word got around the neighborhood that my pizza was pretty darn good. My first thought was, this guy is a Brooklyn native. My pizza will be nothing compared to his, but there was something about him bragging that I couldn't resist the challenge. He talked about how pizza was in his blood, how his dad ran the pizza place around the corner years ago. I remained silent and let my skills answer for themselves. I got a buddy to let us use one of Baker's Pride ovens at his restaurant. We even had total strangers try our pizzas. Every last person chose my pizza over his. I never mentioned to him that I've worked in pizza places almost every day for the last 30 years. I never mentioned that when I'm not working at a pizza place, I'm making pizzas at home at least once every 2 days. I never mentioned that at 9 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a pizza man. Here I am, 45 and getting ready to start my own pizza business. Story 11. I'm a mechanic, and this happens on a daily basis. Here's one of my favorites from a time I was messing with a buddy. I was helping him fix his truck in my garage for free. By helping, I mean I was fixing his truck for free. Me, your manifold absolute pressure sensor is bad. Them, pretty sure it's the plugs or wires. Me, no, your spark is fine, fuel pressure is fine, air is fine. Your fuel regulation is the issue, which is why there is fuel in your oil. Them, you sure it's not the spark plugs? How do you actually know? Me. Asterisk hands them a spark plug still hooked up to the coil wire and presses the remote start button. Asterisk. Them, what the hell, man? Me, spark is fine, isn't it? Them, how much is a manifold absolute pressure sensor? Story 12. Not me, but my brother and best friend. We were in Baltimore for a baseball weekend in 2009 and hanging out at a bar across from Camden Yards. They had a Silver Strike bowling video game. At our local bar back in Boston, we had one as well. I'm decent at the game, but my brother and buddy were amazing at this game, bowling 300 games and whatnot. Two guys were playing this game and drinking. We asked them if we could play when they were done. They asked if we wanted to play them. We said sure. My brother and buddy destroyed these guys. It wasn't even close. These guys said it was a fluke and they wanted a rematch, but this time for a round of beers. Again, Annihilation City. But they kept wanting to play to eventually win a game. No lie, after 13 rounds of beers, they finally gave up. They were great guys. We saw them the next day at the same bar, and they walked up to us with beers in hand already and said, "Rematch." To this day, we still hang out with them whenever we go to Baltimore. And to this day, they have never won. To add details, the guys were buying 2 beers each time they lost a game to the 2 guys they lost to, for my brother and friend. The beers were Natty Boh, which is Baltimore's cheap, gross, awesome beer. I can't remember the price, but they were under $2 a piece back then. They would buy the beers, and they'd just start piling up on the table next to the machine, so we were all just drinking them. I'd say around 25 to 30 beers between the 5 of us in 4 or 5 hours. The tab was probably around $60 for beers, but we were there all night getting wings and a million appetizers, so we all just paid the tab anyways. Story 13. My office announced a laser tag team building event 2 weeks after I played in the Laser Tag Ultrazone National Championships, which were an actual thing in 1997. Edit. Sigh. No, this is not a How I Met Your Mother reference, which I have to specify every time I talk about it. Story 14. When working as a teacher, I defeated a lot of students in Pokemon battles because they didn't consider that I had about 15 years of fighting experience ahead of them. Novices. Story 15. I dated a guy in college who was incredibly book smart, working on his master's with the intention to pursue a doctor of philosophy. I was doing the good old 5-year plan for college and quite content with my level of brainpower compared to his. What he underestimated was my fondness for word games, especially Scrabble. I like to think I'm quite good. Well, in the 3 years we dated, we only played Scrabble once, and I beat him soundly. The icing on the cake was when I got a 50-point word score for playing one letter. He literally wiped all the letters off the board and had a mini tantrum, claiming that I cheated. I got out my trusty Scrabble dictionary and proved his loss. Story 16. Not a physical challenge, but I sell building materials for a living, similar to a store like Home Depot, but for professionals who build skyscrapers and stadiums. There have been many occasions where an older man with no construction knowledge tries to lecture me on what I do for a living. Story 17. People say all kinds of random things about how weather and climate function. I'm a meteorologist in disguise, working as a data scientist but with a master's and a PhD in meteorology. When I politely and gently inform them how things actually work, people are usually very interested to know more. But occasionally, I get something like, "Oh yeah? And how do you know?" Well, I have published several papers on the matter and would love to discuss it all night. So far, they've all backed down after that. Most commonly, I've heard the claim that the same weather as the day before acts as a better forecast than the weather forecast. Such an attractively simple claim, yet so inaccurate for the mid-latitudes where I live. For climate change, the top thing I hear is that they don't account for clouds in the climate models. Of course they do. It's a massive component of understanding climate. Ridiculous. However, clouds are very difficult to model well due to their complicated interactions and massive range of scale, from micrometers to kilometers. Story 18. When I was around 10, there was an old man with Alzheimer's in my neighborhood who would often approach my friends and me. He would ask us questions that we obviously didn't know the answer to, such as, "What's the square root of 2?" which was one of his favorites. One day, I decided I would memorize the square root of 2 to 20 digits. Sure enough, he did ask me the question again, and I was totally prepared. He was extremely impressed, and of course, he forgot who I was, so he would continue to ask over and over again. Story 19. My landlord tried blaming me for damage to the kitchen cabinets, but didn't know that I am in construction and am very familiar with home building codes. They placed the cabinets too close to the stove, and the glue that held the laminate had melted. Story 20. Someone at a bar bet me there were only 30 days in a particular month. They offered me $20 if I could prove them wrong right then, during the days before cell phones. I was born on the 31st of that month and showed them my driver's license. The person was drunk and maybe not the brightest. My driver's license wasn't fake. My birthday is definitely in either January, March, May, July, August, October, or December.